Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Nina Asenova, and I am the Conference Director for Strategy Execution Innovation Forum. From the name of the Balanced Scorecard Institute and Strategy Execution Innovation Forum, I would like to welcome you for joining us today on this webinar on measuring and monetizing strategic innovation. Before I hand you over to Joe and David, I would like to remind you that this webinar is recorded and the presentations and recordings will be available and sent to you after this webinar. Also, for all attendees today at the webinar, we are running a special offer for 2-for-1 on all delegate passes for our upcoming conference on the 29th of April and 1st of May here in Dubai. Now, I would like to leave you in the company of our long-term partners and supporters from the Balanced Scorecard Institute and David Wilsey, who is the COO of the Balanced Scorecard, will take over. Enjoy and feel free to ask any questions at any given time. David?
Thank you, Nina. And hello, everyone. Today's webinar will discuss the challenges that come with trying to measure success in innovation. It's obviously a topic of interest. We had almost 900 people register for this webinar, so it's an interesting thing to try to get your arms around. We'll discuss what your organization needs to think through to define what innovation means for your strategy. We'll talk about the steps you need to design and implement measures that will help you implement an innovation strategy and create value. We'll talk about the critical success factors for successfully introducing, managing, and monetizing strategic innovation. And we'll talk about how to develop and maintain a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. Sorry about that. I should have shown you this while I was talking through those things. It's a little early here on the East Coast. I'm in Cary, North Carolina. As Nina said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Balanced Scorecard Institute. I've been here since 2005. I've been consulting and training with organizations, probably hundreds now, on either strategy or measurement ever since that time. Like I said, I'm in Cary, North Carolina, on the East Coast in the U.S. It's 7 in the morning. I'm at home, so you'll just have to take my word for it that I'm dressed just like the picture it shows you on the screen here. Joe, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, David. Thank you, Nina, and welcome everyone to this webinar on measuring strategic innovation. I'm on the exact opposite side of the country. I'm in San Jose, California, and I will guarantee you I'm not dressed like that this morning because it's early morning here. Anyway, spent a lot of years immersed in innovation and technology rollout since I was with the IBM Corporation for 25 years. And now helping a lot of clients do innovation and monetization as they move through their technical and scientific projects around the world.
All right, so one of the primary challenges here in measuring innovation is simply to get your team to agree on what we mean by innovation. Innovation is an intangible. It's an abstract concept. It can mean very different things to different people. So when I consult, I often will start a conversation like this by asking the team if they all understand what this means. What do we mean by innovation? And a lot of times, as you go around the room, everyone will nod their head at first, indicating, well, of course we know what we mean by innovation. But when I start to actually ask for specific examples, it becomes clear going around the room that there's very different definitions of the word and very different understandings within the same team of what we're actually aiming for. So obviously, if we can't agree on specifically what we're trying to achieve, then we're not going to be able to agree on specifically what we should be measuring. So the challenge here is, how do you measure an intangible like innovation? So let's start with a poll question. I'd like to see, how you all define innovation for your organization. So the question I'll put to you all, and using the GoToWebinar technology here in a second, is, when you talk about innovation at your organization, which of the following do you mostly mean? Do you mean a high-level new product development type strategy, or do you mean a one step within a larger strategy or a process, or are you describing really more of a culture that you're aiming for, or even something else? So let me see if I can get the technology to work. Okay, so you should see the questions. I'll give you about a minute or so or two. As soon as we see, it looks like a majority of the folks voting, we'll look at the responses. All right, looks like we're up to about 70% participation. I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. All right, almost everybody has voted. So let's close the polls and I'll share the results with you. So it looks like we have 43% answered B. This is only one step of a larger strategy. That's pretty typical. In other words, we're trying to achieve something else, but innovation is a key part of that story. Then we had 32% that said that we are, in fact, focusing on a new product development type strategy. 18% said that this is a description of culture primarily, and then 7% said something else. So it'd be interesting, maybe if any of you come to the conference, it'll be interesting to discuss with you what else you might have meant by innovation. Interesting. Joe?
Okay. When we talk about innovation, and David's poll question earlier kind of alluded to this, is that, there typically are three, what I call categories that innovation falls into. It can be a strategy. I mean, some organizations, they are driven by a innovation predominantly technology-based. And ones that come to mind are like Apple, Google, Samsung, IBM, all those companies that have been generating products and services that are pushing the envelope on technology adoption. Next is a group that will be those that can, to the biggest percentage of the poll response, is a change in a process, put a strategy in place to change the process. So, one of the things that process changes bring are efficiency and productivity, better go-to-market delivery capabilities, and those are all innovative by their very nature, because you're going into that evaluation and innovation space with the idea in mind that you're going to change something. It's not the next big thing. It's not the next big product. It may not be the next big service offering, but you're moving the envelope and the capabilities of a process further as we go along. And finally, you may want to start to establish a cultural change within the company or the organization. Now, culture is very deep and wide in its links to innovation. One of the biggest things that we found working with clients on innovation projects is that, does the organizational capacity exist with the right culture in mind going forward to look at problems differently, such that they're going to make change, and it's going to be many times of an efficiency, productivity, and technical nature. Next, David. If we take a look at innovation, both from a business and industry, and on the next slide, we'll take a look at governments and nonprofit. There was a seminal work that was done back in 1999, and they identified 3 horizons that in the business and industry world take over in terms of trying to resolve in a monetization of their innovation that results in higher profits. It should come as no surprise. Business and industry has as its end outcome, ultimate end outcome, increasing profitability or return on equity. And so the actions that they take in terms of these 3 horizons are going to help plot that stage. So if we take a look at Horizon 1, and by the way, you're going to hear You may think 1999, oh geez, I mean, it's like, that's dark ages. But even today, you'll see financial news reports, innovation books, technology books, always referencing something called Horizon 1, 2, or 3. And this is the seminal work that was done that still is stuck, so to speak, in defining innovation as you move forward. Now, Horizon 1 is your core business, and core is, in this case, and you'll often see this associated with Horizon 1, is the innovation in existing operation and markets, much like many of you responded in the poll that David just ran earlier. Next is Horizon 2, which says, well, we've got our core businesses in play, and we want to extend and defend our core businesses. And again, this is business and industry. Well, what do we have to do from an adjacent side of things? Or do we need to build some emerging businesses? Because in this day and age, no company is going to be able to stand still without growing the business somehow. And many times it's products and services. Many times it's changes in processes, changes in value creation, value capture. So they have to make some changes in the adjacent world that they're currently in. And then finally, in Horizon 3, companies that have got a very solid core have started to invest in some adjacent innovations in their business, probably expanding their portfolio. They have to create some new transformative innovation to create new business and markets down the road. Each of these require a whole set of individuals, whole set of culture, whole set of processes in order to manage those and bring those to fruition going forward. And now if we look at the next slide, we take a look at how we can apply this, and this is what we did at the Institute, was to apply this to the government and nonprofit sector. Because we know governments and nonprofit, by standard best practices in the industry and developing strategy through balanced scorecards, it's not about financial attainment. It's something in terms of the constituents and the stakeholders, and below that is the financial managing and distribution of your funds and your budgets that have been put in place. But that doesn't negate Horizon 1, which is the innovation of your delivery of existing operations, core programs and services. That's core to a government and nonprofit organization. And Horizon 2 is improving the cost effectiveness. That's changing something through process change, changing something through equipment change, changing something through better customer service skills, that type of thing. And then Horizon 3 is transformative. And what about new problems or solutions that have happened in the country or the organization, or not the country or the community that the government agency or the nonprofit serves that have to be addressed? And that's a typical Horizon 3 type organization. David?
All right, so with this first category, we're talking about strategy, really. So innovation, in essence, is about transforming ideas into value. So this value can be transformational, like the invention of the light bulb, or it could be just like a new idea for shipping boxes that saves the organization money. The point is that different organizations will define that value creation depending on the strategic altitude they're focusing on. So the higher strategic altitude approach is innovation as a strategy. So innovation as a strategy implies that the ability to, we're taking an idea and turning it into a value is critical to successfully positioning the organization for the future. So by strategy, we mean, of course, positioning choices made, the path and the action taken, the plan to move the organization from its current state to some future desirable state. So in other words, the world is changing, and as an organization, you have to decide where you want to be at some future date based on your assumptions about how the world is changing. And so if innovation is part of your strategy, that's a key skill that you need as an organization, a capacity you need in order to get your organization in the right place to meet the demands of some future world. Okay, so the types of organizations I'm talking about here often have innovation as a strategic theme. Okay, a strategic theme is one of the main focus areas of the organization, one of the pillars of excellence for your strategy. So for each theme, you have a strategic result. So you might see strategic themes for an organization like operational excellence or strategic partnering, but then for these organizations you have one that's focused on innovation. Okay, they might not call it innovation excellence. They might call it, a creative powerhouse. I saw one organization do. The point is that it's focused on the innovation capacity, skills in order to move the organization forward. So many people think that innovation is nothing more than a stroke of genius and that all good ideas just simply happen. What they don't realize is that organizations like this specialize in innovation as a process. Okay, they specifically manage several sources of innovation. Like they have teams that analyze markets for opportunities. They watch competitors, they listen to customers, they do all the things they need to do to make sure that if an idea presents itself, they capture it in a disciplined manner. And at the same time, they also monitor technology advances for opportunities. They evaluate them and select the best ideas, and they marry these two together, the ideas with the technologies, to identify market opportunities for their new products. And then for some organizations, they have to make a decision as to whether this new product development work should happen in-house or should it happen externally. So if it's an idea that fits within the organization, the current structure, the current operational structure, then they will design the product in-house, and the new product development process has specific steps to it, concept generation, etc. And then if it does not, if the new idea does not fit within the structure of the current operations, they form a new venture, and they have to go through all the work to create that venture first, and then they go through the new product development process. And then there's a launch or commercialization process that occurs after the new product has been developed and prototyped and all of that. So that's the basic process that an innovation management type organization will follow. And from a measurement standpoint, if you stand back and look at this process, there are opportunities to measure success throughout the entire process. So you have more contributing factors on the front end, leading type indicators driving the end outcomes that you're aiming for on the other end of the screen. Okay, so now Joe will show you, some other strategy components for an organization like that.
When we talk about creating a strategy or an innovation strategy going forward, we always come back to what are the steps that you have to go through? What is the strategy you have to put together in terms of objectives? And as we're talking here on KPIs, and of course you're going to have a series of initiatives and projects that put that together. But if we take a look, and this could be any organization, it doesn't matter if it's business and industry or if it's government or it's nonprofit, but if you get a bunch of people in the room and just basically say, hey, we're trying to implement an innovation strategy, because let's face it, I don't think you can have many conversations in business conference rooms these days where the word innovation or change the way we're doing things, or we need to look at the process change on this. That's all innovation related. So if we had a result that says we want to be the leading innovator of multimedia products, I mean, you're going to put through a strategy that comes through and says, okay, so what is it that we have to do? So if David will go through and build this for me, first thing is, and we alluded to this earlier, is you got to make sure you've got the right organizational capacity in terms of the right people, right skills at the right time with the right tools, technology, and infrastructure and governance that's going to take a focus on any kind of an innovation strategy for any particular focus or target of innovation that you want to put together. So if we use this set of perspectives for a for-profit company, and those of you that are in the audience that understand construction of balanced score strategy based on balanced scorecard, these are the standard best practice labels for the perspective names. So that organizational capacity says, we've got technology, we know how to work through cross-functional teams, we actually have assessed, and we know we have a culture of innovation, and you'll know from doing your readings and research that a culture of innovation has a very large percentage of acknowledgement that you have to build failure into any of these innovation initiatives that go forward, because they don't all become successful. But you manage them like any other kind of an initiative or project, and you structure out the scope so that you give it a good opportunity. And part of the culture is having the right skill set of the people on board, and the project management expertise helps do that. In the process side, you're going to have to identify exactly what you're going to do. New product marketing, market opportunities analysis. You have to do concept development. Prioritization is a big part of it, and improving the project portfolio and management. And then eventually you have to move to the launch status. And next, you're putting it all together such that the customer has other opportunities to purchase goods and services, or some type of output from the internal process level that helps you increase your speed to market and expand your customer footprint and number of markets. And finally, for a for-profit organization, it comes down to what I call the big three, which is you're trying to increase profits. And the way you do that is you do it by increasing revenues, and you also do it by keeping your production costs low. So we can relate this entire result of being a leading innovator of multimedia products and the various strategic objectives that must be focused on a continuous basis as you go through, and start this from maybe Horizon as a part of your core, or maybe it's a part of Horizon 2 where you're trying to extend and create an adjacent part of your business going forward. It's not unusual for many firms to have their base fundamental organizational strategy in place and create a separate strategy for their innovation, just like we're showing here, that may focus on something. In this case, it's multimedia products. I've had some clients focus on something that is just as wide and deep as multimedia through something like supply chain management, because it cut across all of the divisions around the world that they needed to focus on. And that was an innovation project just for them. Next. So if we take a look at a government or nonprofit, we typically see things like government reform, such as service redesign projects, so we can deliver our services more efficiently and effectiveness, and cost reduction as we go through and take a look at what exactly has to be done. The key thing is that it's part of another strategy, as I mentioned from the previous slide, which may be your overall strategy and for the organization. But this particular one on government reform many times will be driven by structure higher up in the state or the government or the country, and also through some of the local locales that the organization might be working in. So these are all focus items that require people to look at what they're doing differently. And that's why their ability and capabilities need to be assessed, not only for the teams that are put in place for projects like this, but also for the overall organization to accept change, which in this case is part of an innovation process. Next. If we take a look at, this is probably the one that everybody knows the most. Jeff Bezos said this well, and this goes back to some of the cultural things, some of the process things. But if you look at what he said here, it's that to be inventive, you have to experiment. Yes, every innovation project, every innovation initiative, every innovation strategy has to go into it with the thought that we are going to change the way things we're doing. It might be new products or services, it might be new processes, it might be different culture, etc. But it means you'll fail a lot too, because some of these things, regardless of how well you do all of the management of that particular initiative or project, you're not going to probably meet some of the projections that you put in place. But you have to embrace high judgment failure. Was it worth trying? And that kind of says, without adding words to Jeff's statement here, you learn something from what you failed at. It didn't work, so let's try something different. And all of our most important successes at Amazon have been through that kind of failure, try again and repeat the loop, but make sure you learn from those failures as you go through. And you have to stand up and say, this worked and here's why. This didn't work and here's why. And so we don't repeat history on the next iteration of that particular strategy execution. David?
There's lots of aspects to a successful culture and innovation. So leadership has to recognize that innovation as a priority. Number one, they have to empower their employees. They have to, as we saw with the Amazon.com slide, experimentation and failure have to be accepted as part of the process. And this can be really difficult for some leaders and managers to accept if they're used to succeeding all the time or judging people based on performance, etc. So it's something that leaders and managers really need to embrace. Even if you're not a product development type organization, you still have to bring process thinking to your innovation. You should have a system in place to capture ideas. You should be disciplined about developing the capabilities you need to grow as an organization. You should get used to thinking about a business case to justify new initiatives, and then be disciplined in the way you manage them. Maybe you're not going to be as sophisticated as the Googles of the world or Sony, but it still requires focus and a lot of dedication to the work that you have to do. And one of the challenges here is to make sure that there's appropriate buy-in from top to bottom in the organization. New ideas can be scary for some people, especially if it feels like you're changing the way they do their job. For our clients, we like to coach them towards a team-based approach to strategy development and execution because inclusion drives ownership. Employees take ownership of things that they build themselves. There's this Chinese proverb that we like to refer to that tell me and I'll forget, or show me and I may remember, or involve me and I'll understand. So our observations is that innovative strategies created by an exclusive team tends to be owned by just that exclusive team. And then strategies, innovation strategies that are created entirely by a consultant, like us, are owned by the consultant. So when the consultant leaves, the strategy leaves with the consultant. The only way you can really get to success here is to have the strategy created by a cross-functional representation of the organization. In that scenario, the strategy is owned by the organization itself. In general, BSI will not accept consulting engagements in which we're expected to build the strategic plan or build the measurements for them. We want to provide the structure, the facilitation, and things like that, so that the client takes ownership. It's key to success. All right, so now that we've talked through innovation as a strategy, let's talk about the measurement side for a minute. So once you have a consensus around innovation, you can start focusing on measurement. And before we get too far, we want to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what we mean by measurement. So we're talking about critical or key indicators of progress towards a desirable outcome. We're talking about things like the number of something. We're talking about quantifiable comparisons. The number of something, the percentage of something, the rate of something. We're not talking about initiatives or actions or tasks. Unfortunately, a lot of strategic plans, when they get to the measurement step, because they just don't know better, they'll list all the actions that they're going to take. We're going to partner with Microsoft by the end of the quarter. Well, that's not really a measurement that you can trend over time, like this picture right here. That's just an action we're going to take and we're going to be done. So we're not talking about something like that. We're also not talking about a survey. A lot of times people will say, we'll do a customer satisfaction survey, and that's my measurement. What they really mean by that is we're going to trend the percentage of people that are satisfied with our products, that score a 5 out of 6 on a questionnaire. That number is the measurement, not the tool itself. We're also not talking about a piece of software. Even though we show pictures of software in our slides, that the software is just the supporting tool. Just because you buy the tool doesn't mean that you necessarily have a set of measurements. Now, good measurements, good performance measures are the ones that are most meaningful, are the ones that provide objective evidence of progress. By objective, we mean if Joe and I both take the measurement, we're both going to come up with the same answer. In other words, as opposed to a subjective type measurement where we just score some, maybe we're measuring our employee performance, and I think that the employee did fantastic, so I score him an 8 out of 10, and Joe doesn't like him, so he gets a 5. That's subjective. So it should be objective evidence of progress of achieving something related to your strategy. Okay, so it should measure what you think it's measuring. It should offer a comparison. There's all different kinds. Some of them focus on efficiency, effectiveness, etc. And there should be a balance between leading and lagging indicators. In other words, you want to be able to. The leading indicators are the ones that you're managing, that are predictive of success in the future. Lagging indicators indicate whether you've achieved some success in the past. And so you manage the leading indicators in order to create success in the lagging end. We'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. And one of the key steps, especially in innovation, is to take whatever you're describing as innovation and describe it in terms of concrete terms and in an intended result. In other words, if I can take, when we write strategy, we have a habit of writing using abstract language or vague ideals. We want to employ best practices. Our performance should be optimized or world class. We use these phrases. It's like consultant speak. It is way too vague to really apply a measurement to. You shouldn't be that vague anyway, but especially when you're talking about innovation, you really have to help your team get to the point where we can describe in concrete terms what do we mean by innovation. So it's not improved thought leadership, but in concrete terms we can say people read or recommend our content. So the key to do that is to use sensory language. Make sure it's something you can visualize, or that you can use one of your other senses to directly observe an end result. Okay, so it looks something like this. You've got an objective. This is a little more clear-cut one. We'll talk about innovation in a second. You've got a clear objective. I want to improve the customer experience, but the experience is a little vague. So I translate that into a concrete intended results. Checkout is faster. Facilities are clean and safe. I can observe those things. I can easily create a measurement around those. So we're talking about intended results using concrete sensory specific language. These are things you can see, hear, smell, taste, or feel. Abstract language is useful in a strategy sense in that it's easier to develop consensus around, but it's vague. We're talking about concepts, vague ideals like sustainable, innovative, reliable, leadership. There's a million of these phrases in the management lexicon that we're all used to using that are all abstract, and it's much harder to measure abstract language. Concrete language, incidentally, is 2 to 3 times more memorable than abstraction. So if you're trying to be a good leader and you're trying to communicate well with your employees as to what you want, what you expect from them, you should try to always use concrete words. Because you can only measure what you can observe or detect. You can only implement what you can observe or detect. I'll show you what I mean. Let's say I ask you all, let's say I've got 2 teams, and I ask you to go buy for our company a fleet of cars. And I tell team number 1, I want a fleet of quiet, blue, 4-door, fuel-efficient cars. That team will come back to me with cars that look like this, because we're talking about concrete. In concrete terms, it's very easy to understand what I'm asking for. On the other hand, if I were to say to team number 2, I want world-class, high-quality, great value, high-performing cars, I might actually be surprised by the variety of cars that come back to me, because it is not clear from the abstract language what I am asking for. Okay, so this is why it's so critical to translate strategy into concrete terms. You can only measure what you can observe or detect. So the first step in innovation is to describe it in concrete terms. You have to translate it into something that we all can agree on what we're aiming for. Joe?
Okay, David. When you take a look at some innovation results that were put in place and executed on under the label of an innovation project, and some changes that the organization hoped to have realized by those innovation projects or initiatives, you're going to see some results that some of you may say, well, geez, we do that now. We always market to increase our revenue. But in the case of an innovation project, there might be some changes that are made in how you go about assessing those markets and what additional markets might be available out there for you to target. So there's a blurring, I like to call it, there's a blurring between, there's no fine line between, is it an innovation? Is it standard operating procedures to the way we do business? Successful new products are developed. You'll see in a minute on the next slide that that's very typical as to how businesses and organizations, this could be successful new services if you were a government or a nonprofit, as well as a for-profit for products or services. They always are continually assessing what's going on in their market space. So they may have to take a look at what new offerings or new products are necessary. Benchmarking potential markets are quickly identified. Do you have, from a government perspective, new classes, new sets of individuals that need to be serviced and identified quickly? Are you continually auditing your costs such that you can reduce your costs going forward? And customers' needs are met quickly. Our experience with many of our clients, when they do a deep dive into their strategy evaluation and their strategy system evaluation at the end of the fourth quarter or near the end of the fourth quarter, is that customer value proposition changes all the time. And that's why you have to have innovation strategy built into the background that says we've got this change, we need to move something through the system quickly, and we've got a process to do that. The culture of innovation gets to this empowerment and engagement. What's different about that? And target potential employees that want to work here. I mean, a lot of organizations are very much identifying that they want to have a place that's a fun place to work. It's the place to work. And they want basically a surplus of inquiries coming in to work for their particular organization. Next, David. Now, when we take a look at the right results for your organization will depend, obviously, on your specific strategy. Now, let's talk about start getting to the next stage of an innovation strategy, but it's really not a next stage because this has been built in as you go through your innovation strategy. You'll have to take a look at monetizing, and this is where we come into the things like a monetization model of what has to be done with your innovation or your innovative idea. But really, this is all about the organization, be it for-profit or a government agency, realizing value. Now, the value realization for government is better services and support for the community and the constituency. So there's three premises that you have to keep in mind. Innovation is about creating new or additional value, not necessarily new things. So one of the things we're going to talk about down here in a minute is process improvement. So it's not necessarily something that's you can put your hands on in terms of a new product or services out the door, but it's a change in how we do a current product, process, or service. Innovation is going to come from many different forms. A very simple change to how you process applications or process any follow-up documentation in a process is itself an innovative change. And innovation is systemic and it should take into account all aspects of the organization. It can't survive in just a very secured, fenced off area that says, no, this is just the innovation for this. It has that typically has impact across the entire organization. So let's take a look at three examples from around the world. What about that one where, yes, you're in Horizon 1, you got your core business, but to survive, you got to do something that's adjacent to that. So they innovate new products or services. So here's some examples. Those of you that use Gillette Mach 3s know that those shavers were the it for many, many years. And then all of a sudden, we see a whole series of blue oceans created by companies like Harry's, Dollar Shave Club, Dorco, Bevel, Wet Shave Club, and I'm sure I don't even have all of them listed. And of course, these blue oceans exist for only a short period of time. Meanwhile, Gillette is still trying to change how it does its marketing, its production, its quality, its revenue, and it looks at its monetization model so they can continue to make money with the Mach 3 turbo razor. Harry's and Dollar Shave Club have really changed how that works. And this is where typically some of you in the audience, when we talk about a monetization model for a product or services, you get into the things like the various aspects of, freemium, or is it capacity, or is it feature-based, is it time-based, is it pay-as-you-go, is it tiered pricing? And that doesn't necessarily, so that tiered pricing is particularly sensitive to us here in California because Pacific Gas and Electric took their long-term billing process and changed their monetization model to a tiered pricing based on our usage. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a new product or service. It's a change for something that was already there. Well, look what happened with the Apple iPod music player, iTunes music service. Pretty soon now we have Amazon Music, Pandora, and a whole series of blue ocean competitors come out to take on what the typical standard setter was with the Apple iPod music player. Let's take a look at how you change or create innovative revenue streams. So you're trying to capture new values. Well, what about paid search versus free search? Any of you that have done any kind of academic degree pursuits have realized that there are a lot of places out there that you can go out and research free. What's the standard one that comes to mind for research information? Wikipedia. Do a lot of academic institutions permit you to use references from there as judged and looked at? No. So you have to go to something that's got some substance to it. So now you'll get into some other searches that will say, well, we'll give you a little freemium model and you'll get certain things. But if you want the whole 9 yards or the whole information and the whole resource chain, you'll have to pay some kind of a fee per month. So that's a combination of freemium and pay as you go. Look at Blockbuster. Blockbuster used to have a gazillion stores in the US and they were operating around the world. What happened to them? Well, they got hit by a change in technology through streaming video. So again, blue oceans were created with Amazon Prime, and at one point, Netflix was in the financial news as the next Blockbuster because they were a subscription service. And you had to order your DVDs, you got them in the mail, and you returned them. Well, Netflix is now turned around 180 degrees. They are one of the higher valued companies because they have a combination of subscription via streaming and subscription being still will deliver to you in the mail if that's what you need. And the last but not least is you're going to redesign or upgrade core operating processes. That's something that's the adjacent in Horizon 2. You're going to make a change. And we take a look at automotive manufacturer warehousing systems now embrace robotics. I mean, they've totally looked at how they can improve their processes. And if it needs to be said, yes, we can replace the human worker with something that's much more precise because it's a repetitive process that is done over and over and over again, and we can get the machines to do it for us at 100% rate of success. And now the next thing that's coming along is artificial intelligence and knowledge-based systems are taking a toehold into database systems going forward. The decisions and those types of things that humans make on a regular day-to-day basis are now being captured by artificial intelligence and repetitive. So that's an innovation change for them as well. And by the way, this is not the exhaustive list. There's at least 12, 13, or 14 more areas that can be hit by innovation projects and strategy going forward. Next. If we take a look at the innovation strategy and managing the connections between leading and lagging measures. Now, it should come as no surprise for those of you that develop strategies with a balanced scorecard. Those first two perspectives, organizational capacity and internal process, is usually all your generators of activity for your organization. So those are leading indicators. Those are things you're putting in place based on some kind of a strategy or plan, be it your corporate strategy, your innovation strategy, any strategy going forward. You need to have those things in place to move forward. The lagging indicators are at the end of the quarter. I like to tell my clients and students that when you look at that financial perspective at the end of the quarter, the house is already burned down from finance. You got now you got to do something that changes, and you're going to usually go back down to the leading indicators and see what you have to change. So as you move forward across this slide, you'll see that you got a number of things that can be put in place. So it's leading to lagging in relative terms. So, number of high potential market opportunities identified. Let's go back to the Harry's and the Dollar Shave Club. They probably did a full-blown analysis to look at what's the potential for the market opportunities that are out there. So they created a leading indicator for that. And then they put in place a lagging indicator says number of new products launched. Well, the interesting thing is Harry's and Dollar Shave Club only focus on shavers, whereas the Mach 3 and Gillette is part of a portfolio of products that Gillette produces and sells to the public. So they're focused now on just a certain number of products that need to be launched, which is a leading indicator for eventually the final indicator, which is the revenues from those markets and the lagging indicator. And it's interesting when we talk about this innovation strategy, and I use the Harry's and Dollar Shave Club, they start out as a subscription model for monetizing their revenue as a part of their innovation strategy they put in place for their product lines. But the interesting thing is, I think I was in Target stores here recently. Harry's has actually started to have presence in a brick and mortar store. I'm sure it's a test because there's nothing on their website that says that they're doing this as a standard way of, they're not directing you to any retailer because they are strictly like an Amazon. You set up a subscription, you get the blades every so many months, you can change your quantity, you can stop it, you can start it. I mean, it makes it very easy. I mean, and it follows, in my case, it follows me around the world when I need those products. Next. And when we take a look at the next slide, let's go back now. If you remember, we had different labels on these perspectives. Now, these are not perspectives now. These are typically your KPIs, be they leading indicators from operational sides to intermediate and outcomes. Again, though, if we use the analysis, and this is the analogy to the logic model for those of you that built based on our process and our methodology that we use for KPI development, you got a series of inputs that have to be done. Well, let's cover the obvious. You got to have the tools and technology, the infrastructure. There's no sense going into a technology project without having the right infrastructure and tools. I mean, it sounds good on paper, but at the end of the day, you need some massive innovation funding. That could be CapEx, and you probably have to have a good smattering of OpEx as well. You have to have the right people on board. We've already mentioned about the right culture, and because this is now a very specific focus, you have to make sure that your project management skills are up to speed. You're going to create an innovation portfolio expansion because maybe this is an add-on, and you're going to have to make sure you can execute on the projects, go out and get partner alliances to create additional values if it's something that you can't produce and handle totally inside of your own organization. Idea flow, yeah, you're going to have to generate ideas for a particular strategy innovation, and you're going to have to talk about how you're going to product and production launch. The outputs, pretty straightforward. Technology leadership is what you're looking for in some cases. In some cases, it's just better efficiency, and that's over on the other side of that particular level, process improvements. Your customer base hopefully will be expanded. You're going to change your product and service performance to your current constituents, and you're going to grow your customer base. And at the end of the day, for any organization, it's value recognition, it's that growth, it's that cost efficiency, and then for most governments and nonprofits, an improved quality of life for your constituency. And it's interesting when you think about the horizons on this. Today, I just recently got an email or a newsletter from one of my clients in the South Pacific, and this is a company that's based on providing gasoline, fuel oil, lubricants. Some islands they do power generation, but they have launched into a Horizon 2 type business where they're doing coconut processing, and they're exploiting on the islands the fact that they've got this abundancy of resource of coconuts, and they're boosting their agricultural sector. They're generating new avenues for clean and clean water and clean energy. But the interesting thing is, on the ultimate end outcome, their forecasts are raising the gross domestic product by at least 5% across this chain of islands. It's the Federated States of Micronesia, and it's vital energy. So they've taken a look at something that was a natural resource and gone into that Horizon 2 and said, and actually they're in the Horizon 3 stage, but now they're getting ready to break ground on the manufacturing plant. They're putting the Horizon 2 in place. So here's a core business: fuel oil, gasoline, lubricants, some electricity, power generation, and now here's something that's Horizon 3, and they've come right straight down to Horizon 2. David?
Sorry, I jumped the gun there, trying to look at the next slide. We have a few more minutes to answer your questions. Now, usually when we have hundreds of people online, we open the door to questions, and there's a flood of hundreds of questions right off the bat. So we won't have time to get to all of them. If you all want to reach out to us at the balancescorecard.org website or visit us at the conference, we're happy to answer as many questions as you'd like. But let's see what we can get to today. It looks like we have maybe 8 more minutes. So in the GoToWebinar dashboard, there's a questions panel. Just add your questions, and Joe and I will take turns. Looks like we have a question from Farzana saying, what would ideal or appropriate number of measures in an employee scorecard, and what would be the proportion of that for innovation? It's a really good question. Usually on the organization level, we're talking about a strategy that has between 12 and 14 objectives. So in other words, your strategy has these components that make that you will hope will move the organization forward, and each one of those objectives has 1 to 3 measures to help you understand whether you're achieving your objectives. So that if you take those numbers and combine them, we're talking about 25 to 40 measures maybe in your whole system. And not all of those are going to be about innovation. I mean, your organization, even if you're Google, innovation is only one part of your strategy. There's a whole bunch of other important factors that you're measuring. So maybe a third of those might be focused on elements of innovation. Joe, any different thoughts?
No, David. I did get. I kept a instant message box open, and I had somebody send me a question, not through GoToWebinar, but they asked a question that I think you and I have run across, and the Institute's run across before. It's if you have a organization. The question was, if you have an organization that doesn't have a very good track record of execution on projects, should you even be thinking about trying to do anything that falls into any kind of category that's conditioned by innovation? And my direct answer to all of my clients and students when I have them in class is, you have to get your project management skills up to speed, because you're talking about doing something that's typically outside of your normal daily routine or monthly routine or quarterly routine or yearly routine at your organization, and it comes with the requirements of a different set of people. different set of sponsors for some of these projects potentially, and the outcomes are under the spotlight. People are watching because you're doing a lot of communications about some kind of a new initiative that's related to innovation. And if you go into it knowing full well that your project management capabilities are not desirable or not getting the results that you expected in the past, you're setting yourself up for maybe what Jeff Bezos said, you're setting yourself up for potential failure before you even get off the starting line. David, I don't know if you have anything else in regards to something like that.
No, I think that's good. All right, so Phil asks, if you have a company that has never had any KPIs except financial, what advice would you give them to get started? Innovation feels like it is level 4. I agree completely, Phil. When you're just getting started at this, what I recommend is keep it simple. You know, divide your strategy up into 3 or 4 themes, and make sure that for each theme you have a handful of objectives, and that you have a couple of key, literally key performance indicators for each one, just to get started, get something, have a few high level goals that you're really trying to achieve, and make sure that you have a decent measure for those, and then over time build out measures for all of your objectives, for all of your for your entire strategy. That's what I would recommend. Joe?
We had one question. Well, we had a couple questions about sharing the slides, and at the close of the webinar, each of you will get a link that will have a recording of the webinar and also a set of the slides as well. There was one question that came in here from Hussam. ROPDE KPI. You're catching me in a non-association stage on this KPI, Hussam. So maybe that's something that we'll have to contact you directly about, so we can get further information about what that is. And I was looking to see if that was incorrectly stated on one of our slides, but I don't think so, David.
Yeah, no, he's referring to a measurement in one of Mark Malinowski wrote an article 4 or 5 years ago that focused on innovation and used that as one of the key measurements. If you send us an email, I will send you an explanation of that offline.
We had another question about what is the relevance of this topic to today's business operations. Well, it's when you start taking a look at and identifying innovation strategy related to processes, new products and services, etc. There's not an attempt to say that the current course and speed of normal everyday business operations has to cease while we focus on this innovation. You're going to have something that's working in parallel with those. And in one case, as I mentioned, while the organization I was working with, one of our clients, had something like supply chain management was critical to every location throughout the world that the organization had presence, they decided to bring closer illumination and more focus on it by creating its own balanced scorecard just for supply chain management. So it works in conjunction. And that's why the formation of the right culture, teams, capabilities, tools, and technology has to be looked at to see what is different than our normal standard operating procedures throughout the year.
Okay, how about one more? Yep. One more, and then like I said earlier, just send us an email or go to balancescorecard.org to contact us directly, and we'll be happy to answer any more questions. But we have one more from Muhammad. It says, how do we convince the board that now we must innovate or die? That's a really good question. I also think this applies to strategy in general. There's been a quote we've been bouncing around. My understanding is that 85% of the Fortune 500 companies from 1950 no longer exist. The reason why they don't exist anymore is because most companies do not continue to innovate. They do not continue to think about how the world is changing and that they have to adapt or else they will die off. So I would use a quote, a statistic like that, to just point out the fact that it is something you have to stay on top of. You have to constantly be addressing your strategy, addressing the world around you, and asking yourself, where will the world be in 3 years? You know, where, and how do we need to adapt to be in this new place in 3 years, where you know, so we can react to whatever changes are going on around us. It's important to, for any organization, even if you're not in the private sector. You know, if you're in the government sector or a nonprofit, you have to be adapting to new technologies and to new trends, demographic trends, and you know, anything that's changing around you. You have to have objectives out that look out into the future and try to put the organization in the right place. Okay.
All right.
Nina, any parting words before we let them go?
Hi, yes. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation, David and Joe. Thank you so much for everyone for your contributions in the discussion that's been going on in the last few minutes. Sadly, we're restricted with the timing, but you're more than welcome to follow up directly to David and Joe after this webinar. And of course, you can meet them in person at the end of this month here in Dubai, where they will be presenting and they will be running masterclass and workshops at the Strategy Execution Innovation Forum. As Joe just reminded, the presentation from this webinar and the full recording will be available in the next 24 hours, and you will receive a link and to download it. Yeah, thank you again for everyone for joining us, and we will keep you posted for any further webinars that we'll be doing together with the Balanced Scorecard Institute.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Look forward to seeing you in Dubai.
Thanks, everybody.